Welcome to TPGI's Real People, Real Stories podcast, where you'll find interesting and diverse stories from folks working to make the world a more inclusive place.
Hey, welcome to Real People, Real Stories podcast, brought to you by TPGI. I am your host, Mark Miller, thanking you for helping us keep it accessible. Do us a favor. If you're enjoying Real People, Real Stories podcast, share it. Tell someone about it. Hey, even link to it from your accessible website. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Dara, great to have you back again. And I know we have an exciting guest that you're very particularly excited to talk to. Marissa, welcome as always. Marissa is our producer. And I want to introduce to everyone Elsa Sjunneson. How did I do with your last name? Okay?
Great.
Perfect.
You got it.
I got it. And man, you know, I was trying to think about how to introduce you because you've got so many kind of cool things going for you here that are related to what we always talk about. So I gave up. I'm going to let you do it. Can you, Elsa, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do? You've got this list of things here, so I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. I am a deafblind hurricane in a vintage dress. I do a lot. I
could not have touched that with I could never have done anything that good. Thank you so much. Deafblind hurricane in a vintage dress. Perfect.
Yeah, no, I write books. I've got my first sort of memoir coming out in October of 2021 called Being Seen, One Deafblind Woman's Fight to End Ableism. I also edit nonfiction for Uncanny Magazine. I write criticism about ability in media. I wrote the Fate Accessibility Toolkit, which was nominated for a Nebula Award in 2020. And I've also won a Hugo Nebula, not a Nebula, a Hugo, a BFA, and an Aurora Award for Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction, which was an anthology about disability and science fiction written by all disabled creators.
Wow.
I wear many hats.
You do. You called yourself a hurricane, but it's a very controlled hurricane. There's a lot of good stuff happening. It's very productive. I like it. I mean, the award winning is amazing. When did you win your first award?
So I won my first award in 2019. That was the Hugo for Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction. And then we won the Aurora and the BFA shortly thereafter.
So what did that first time feel like?
I was the first deafblind woman to win a Hugo.
Wow.
It was a really...
That is amazing.
Yeah, there is something really profound about winning an award in a genre that is essentially gatekept from, because for blind people, access to literature is sort of, you have to take a lot of steps.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't read physical books, you might need a Kindle, but not every book that you want to read is on a Kindle.
Yeah.
If you don't want to buy from Amazon, you have to get other means for reading your books on something like an ebook. If you want audiobooks, you have to be able to get the right audiobook. I'm deafblind, so some narrators don't work for me. That's an access barrier. Mm-hmm. My access to literature has always been somewhat constricted. And so for me to win a literature award really mattered, not just for me, but for other deafblind people who are working to do things in literature and genre.
I would think... I was just going to say, I would think for people with disabilities in general, just to realize that what other people may perceive, or even you yourself may perceive as a limitation, you can get past, and what a huge win for that sort of mentality and attitude. Elsa, I want to introduce you to Dara, who is she is a fan. So I'm gonna step back a little bit here, and I'm gonna let her take over, because I know she's going to fangirl out on you a little bit here. I know she has got a ton of questions for you that I couldn't even get to. So Dara, would you please take this away?
Yes, I want to say I first came across your work on tour in the piece about the shape of water. But I actually wanted to ask about one of the tour pieces. I wrote out the quote because I liked it so much. In your first piece on for you have the quote that says, "I promise to tell stories about disabled people as often as I can, as many stories as I can, because for me, I didn't get enough of them when they were needed." And I wanted to talk, that's talking about writing stories, but can you talk about how that affects the other work you do, the editing, the sensitivity reading, etc.? Can you kind of talk about how that affects your work overall?
Well, I think it's given me a focus. I have the ability to say I work on sensitivity reading as a deafblind woman, and that's what I do. I don't sensitivity read for wheelchair using characters. I sensitivity read for deaf and blind characters because that's my experience and that's where I should be working. But also, those are the stories that I am best equipped to help people tell. When I'm an editor, it's a little bit different because my job is actually not to tell the stories that I necessarily want to see, but it's about what people are bringing to me. I do try to have an emphasis on disabled writers and championing their work, but I also work with authors from many different marginalizations. And in that case, as an editor, what I try to do is make sure that I am bringing as many diverse voices to the front as possible. So it's my job to actually get out of the author's way to some extent. You brought me a really great essay. Fantastic. Let me make sure that it hits your audience where it needs to so that you can tell your story.
Yeah. And so when you were editing the Uncanny issue, because that was such a focused issue, actually, before we do that, some of our audience may not know what a sensitivity reader is. Could you tell everyone what that is?
Sure. A sensitivity reader's job is to take a in-progress work by an author and to read it and to make sure that it represents a marginalization or life experience accurately that may not have been the experience of the author. So I can actually talk about this one because I've been out the author very kindly. I was one of the sensitivity readers for Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun.
Yes, I would have asked about that.
Yeah, and so like working on that was very much, okay, so here are the things that like I think you can change, but also here's what you did really well. And working with Rebecca was amazing. But that's sort of my job, was to give her feedback on how she represented blindness and whether or not it worked.
Yeah, and just to fill in, Black Sun is a fantasy novel by Rebecca Roanhorse, in which one of the main ensemble cast is blind. There are a lot of characters. It is a thick book with many characters. And when you talked about, speaking of sensitivity reading and people changing and fixing things, you've written about On Tour, you've written your Constructing Blindness, about how that's portrayed in fiction. When you think about, what do you see as the biggest pitfall that writers tend to make across the board when portraying a character who's blind?
Oh, it's the assumption that blindness is one size fits all. It's the idea that every version of blindness that we see on television, and it's mostly television, although we see it in literary fiction too, is the idea that it is entirely no light perception blindness 100% of the time. And what that does, and I talk about this in my book, Being Seen, it creates archetypes. It creates sort of these monoliths of disability that then get applied to real people. And so that's what I think the biggest pitfall is whenever anyone is writing disability. It's not just blindness. It's every disability seems to have the like central casting disability concept. And that's what they use because they don't want to investigate the nuance of disability, or they just don't know how.
So when you've been reading, besides the stuff that you've actively advised, what's a character that you found to be a really good representation of blindness or deafness or deafblindness?
Well, there are no good deafblind representations. I can tell you that right now. I really wish there were, but not yet. I really liked Reagan in A Quiet Place because she was portrayed by a deaf actress. And the world that she inhabited felt realistic to me. Like the way that her family used sign interdependence, the complicated relationship she had with her father, the way that, her family had to adapt to her because that was her experience, and also how she just sort of experienced the world. All of it was really valid. So I would say that that's probably the best representation I can come up with off the top of my head.
So basically, you're kind of talking about a relationship between the character and the world building, that it feels lived in terms of their disability.
100%. I don't experience the world as a deafblind person who just kind of exists in space. My relationship to the world that I live in is very important. You know, I have a different interaction with glass doors than you do. I have a different interaction with revolving doors than most people do. I dislike escalators when they're broken, not for the same reason that an able-bodied person does, because it turns into a flat slope that I can't see. So the way that I experience the world is intrinsically linked to my disability. If you're not building a world in a way that you understand the disability and how it relates to it, you're not doing your job.
And that leads into, you wrote a short story called By Claw, By Hand, By Silent Speech with a co-author, I believe, yes?
Merk Rustad, yes.
And in that, the main character uses hearing aids, and there are a lot of details in the story that I noticed about that. Can you kind of talk about your writing process for that story, and also how you explore communication in that story as well?
So the protagonist is a partially hearing, partially deaf character. She's a paleontologist who speaks ASL. So that's her primary mode of communication. She does have some hearing when she cranks up her hearing aids very loud, but she's not a hearing person, she's deaf. Working on that story was very personal to me because I am a hearing aid person. That's what I wear every day, is bilateral hearing aids. But I do not fully speak ASL. That is not my primary mode of communication. So I spent a lot of time thinking about why I was making those choices for this character and what that meant for her in her professional capacity and what that meant for her in the world that she had chosen to live in.
And you know, in the story, it's about communicating with a different species with ASL, which is it's an interesting thought. Do you end up thinking about communication a lot often in your work? You know, you haven't done as many short stories as essays. Do you plan to explore that idea of like communication crossing boundaries more?
I don't know. I mean, the next two fiction projects that I have are very much not, they're not communications based. They are, and I can't really talk about them, but I can say that I tend to be exploring a little bit more the relationship between disabled people and their adaptive devices.
Ooh, and I wanted to ask you, you have a guide dog, right?
I used to have a guide dog. He retired in 2020.
Oh, okay. Can you kind of talk about the importance of adaptability tools? I guess it's weird to call a dog a tool, but you know, canes, dogs, big font, etc. Can you kind of talk about what that means for accessibility?
Well, I think one of the things that non-disabled people think when they see an adaptive aid, like a hearing aid or a guide dog or a white cane, or even just large font, is that it's a nice to have. Like I hear a lot of people, when I have my guide dog, they would say, oh, it's so nice, you can bring your dog with you everywhere. Yeah. Or like they'll look at my hearing aids and I can hook my hearing aids up to Bluetooth and listen to podcasts and take phone calls. And they're like, oh, that's so cool. That's so nice. And it's like, no, this is actually what I need. It's not a nice to have. And I think when we start looking at disabled people's adaptive devices as a part of your body and as a part of your experience and how you navigate in a world that was not built for you, I think that really shifts the perception. Because I used to tell people, like, they would start talking to my guide dog or trying to feed him or pet him. And honestly, I got to a point where I would be like, hey, you're touching my eyeballs right now.
That's a perfect way to say
it. I can completely imagine you saying that, so.
Yeah. Like, my eyeballs are currently licking your hand. Yeah. Thanks.
Also a great sci-fi concept, by the way.
True.
Now I'm just picturing someone walking literal eyeballs on a leash, which is quite an image. But So you're basically saying that the way you think people should think about adaptive devices is as extensions of the person's body, that they are that's what they are.
Yes. My white cane is an extension of my body. It is not something that you touch without consent. It is not something that you pick up without my consent. It's a piece of me. And any other adaptive device should be seen the same way.
And back to your constructing blindness essays, you talked about once, but it wasn't super relevant to the piece, so you didn't go into it a ton more. A lot of characters who are blind don't end up using canes in fiction, despite maybe it might making sense for them to. Can you kind of comment on why you think that is and how writers could do better at that? I talk about writers more probably because I want to be a writer, so it's definitely, tips and tricks.
Sure. I think that a lot of non-disabled writers don't see canes as part of the person. I think it comes back to that idea. But it's also that I think for a lot of people, they don't know how to use the aids. They don't understand how they work. Mm. In Scent of a Woman, which is one of the most famous movies that has a blind character in it, Al Pacino clutches onto a 17-year-old boy for most of the film and flails a black cane in his other hand. What purpose does this serve if he's not scanning the ground with his cane and actually getting information? That's how you use a white cane. But in every instance of a television show where people use a white cane, they sort of poke the world, they kind of flail it around, and it doesn't actually end up being a tool. So what I actually think that authors need to do is to do their research and actually find out how the adaptive aids work, because that's what you're missing. It's not just that you have an adaptive aid, it's that you know how to use it. You know what that information is. With a white cane, I can get the information of how a texture changes, which means I know if I'm going from a hardwood floor to a carpet. I know whether or not there's ice on the ground because of how swiftly my cane goes over a patch of ice, for example. There's information that I'm getting that a non-disabled person may not know about unless if they actually sit down and do their research.
That makes sense.
Tell me about what assistive technology you use on a daily basis. I'm really curious.
So I wear bilateral hearing aids, which are programmed for each ear because they're both different. That's always fun. And I wear them with lavender earplug molds, which are a little bit better for my type of hearing loss. I wear high index glasses, which I also have a pair of reading glasses that make things even bigger than the ones that I'm wearing right now. I use a white cane. I used to have a guide dog, but at this point I've made the switch back to the cane for a couple reasons. I have blinking doorbell lights because I can't always hear my door. I just can't bring myself to install a Ring doorbell, even though I know it would probably be useful. It's just Big Brother is on my doorstep. I have, the Zoom magnifier for my computer. So I have a lot of different sort of technological ways of solving things. But I also think of my Kindle as an adaptive device. It has 300 plus books on it, and that's the only way I can read anymore. So is it an adaptive device or is it a toy? Like, you pick. I consider my bullet journal an adaptive device because it keeps my day in order because my brain is basically marshaled by a bunch of ADHD ferrets. So
I can relate.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I have a question for you. In Stephen King's book on writing, there's a really interesting section where he talks about an instance that he has in this Massachusetts town. He kind of falls down an embankment and has trouble getting back up it. And so he, as you would expect from Stephen King, it starts to spin itself into a short story. And it's one that never has been published. And the reason why is because he talks a lot about the particular law enforcement. I can't remember, it was a long time ago that I read it, but a particular group that comes in and helps them out and stuff like that. And his reason for not publishing it is because he couldn't go back and research that group properly enough to understand how they operate well enough to be honest. He talks a lot about honesty in his writing. And, it leads me to think about ride-alongs and all these things that authors do to try and understand a certain group of people or how something operates. Is there the equivalent? And if not, is there a movement to create the equivalent for people with disabilities? Like when you're talking about somebody portraying somebody who's blind but not using a white cane properly, it seems to me that they need to stick a blindfold on and spend a few days trying to get around in a white cane, along with talking to somebody who uses that device. It seems like that experience would help them as a writer. Is there, are people doing, in air quotes, like ride-alongs for disabilities to help understand this? Or is that something maybe they should be doing and they're not?
So it's an interesting question. I actually think that people shouldn't put a blindfold on and walk around with a white cane, and I will tell you why. Same reason why you shouldn't hop into a wheelchair and wheel around for a day and decide that now you understand. And the reason why is because there's a difference between 3 days using a white cane and a lifetime of use. Mm-hmm. Your characters are experts. Mm. If you walk around with a white cane for a day, you have maybe just the tip of the iceberg, but you don't actually know all of the nuance of using a cane. What I do recommend is, yes, exactly that, a ride-along. Find a blind person in your community who's willing to let you walk around with them. They can talk to you about what information they're getting, how they're using their cane. They might let you take it around for a test run, but I think watching somebody use a cane is going to give you more information than using it yourself, because you just don't have the sensitivity. Like, I don't use protactile sign. I use ASL, because protactile requires you to be able to feel someone signing into your hand and have that information translate into language in your head. Yeah. I don't have that sensitivity. A sighted person who can see the ground in front of them isn't going to have the same sensitivity if they feel the change in the pavement through a cane. So that's sort of why I think it's more about experiencing it through somebody's narrative instead of trying it yourself. Because I think that some things you just can't get like the experience without it being diluted by your own lens as a non-disabled person.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, and I sit here and think, like, I can read Braille, not very well, but I can read Braille, but I have to look at it. If I run my fingers over it, there's no way. I cannot feel all those little tiny dots. Like, no matter how much I try, I don't have, to use your exact words, the sensitivity in my fingertips. So yes, I could read Braille, but no, I can't. It's not the same experience as somebody who's blind that relies on reading Braille through their fingertips would experience. Probably a small example, but that makes complete and total sense. So is that happening? Do you find that authors are starting to do ride-alongs, work with people with disabilities, and really try and understand things better?
I have offered them, not right now because pandemic, but I've been for years doing at the WLA conferences office hours where I will literally just take authors on a walk. I'll be like, okay, we're gonna go for a walk now. Let's talk about how the cane works. Or when I had the dog, it would be like, all right, we're gonna go on a walk with the dog. Pay attention because he moves really fast. Like, that time it was me being led around by a Labrador with like 6 authors chasing after me because the blind dog could outpace them.
Yeah.
I've chased
down
the road them after their dogs before. I know exactly what you're talking about.
So like, this was a dog that was trained. This was a dog that was trained to get me around Manhattan. Yeah. So we were like, pew!
Yeah.
That's
well, I've also had, and I've talked about it on the past in the podcast, just walked around, taken a friend of mine who was blind, taking his dog outside to, use the bathroom and stuff like that. And just the confusion that exists between me and the dog, because the dog wants to push me over to the left and walk me a specific pathway to the door that it knows I'm going to. And I have a different idea, you know. So as a sighted person with a guide dog, my experience with that guide dog did not match my friend's experience with a guide dog in any way. We had a hard time coming to the same mind, for sure.
Well, I mean, I'm partially, and I did have a dog for a while and it did work, but that's only because I can't actually trust my sight. Like my whole entire experience was, my whole experience was, well, that's a red light and it's now not turning green. I actually can't tell if there's a walk sign or if there isn't, which means I had to follow the dog and trust the dog to get me across the street. And that was the thing. I had to completely operate on trust. And sighted people don't necessarily have to do that because they can second guess the dog. And I really couldn't. Yes, I can see some things, but that doesn't change the fact that like I had to fully use the trust, you know.
That must have been really scary, learning to trust the dog when your brain is telling you, but what if there's no crosswalk? Does this dog know what he's doing?
Yeah, well, that was definitely scary. I mean, learning how to cross really busy roads with him was still really intense.
Yeah, I could see that.
You said you were in Manhattan, so I imagine your experience is rather different in a big city than in a small town with like no cars on the roads.
Yes.
Well, and that's something I want to ask about. Do you think, you know, your experience of navigating the world, I'm assuming you see it as kind of fundamentally different from being in a city to being in a rural place, I'm imagining.
Can you rephrase that?
Do you think you'd have to learn different things to navigate like in a rural town versus having to navigate New York?
Yes, absolutely. There are different skills for different areas. I mean, if you are blind and you need to walk around a town that has no sidewalks, it's a very different experience from walking through Times Square. The skills sort of overlap, like they're not discrete, but they do get used in different ways, I guess is a good way of putting it.
I think it's probably not dissimilar to just everybody, right? I know that I live in a small town, and when I go to New York, I'm not near as comfortable navigating New York as I am my own little small town. And boy, do I feel better if I'm with somebody that's native to New York helping me, you know, and they move a lot quicker and better. It's just what the change is probably where it's really very different.
I wanted to go back to the image of you being tailed by the authors like ducklings. So you obviously you speak it that you were speaking to authors. What do you end up like? What kind of topics do you end up teaching authors about? Is it just general, like how to write characters better, or is it more specific topics?
I tend to teach people sort of the specifics of like how. So like I'll end up doing, you know, this is how you use a white cane. This is how you work with a guide dog, or this is how I experience the world sort of in specific contexts. Like one of the panels that I did last year was about disability and sword fighting. So I talked about what it's like to be a blind sword fighter.
That must be
and it's really fun. I'm excited to have my first fencing lesson in a year and a half all afternoon.
Oh, that is an entirely new topic. I would love to hear about that later.
Yes,
so can you
fencing.
as a former fencer myself, I would love to hear how you accommodate for fencing.
What blade did you use?
Well, I fenced all three. I fenced foil, epee, and saber. Foil, I probably fenced more. I was quick because I had a martial arts background, so I was okay with epee, but I never got the finesse to hit close. And then, you know, saber, boy, does it hurt, but boy, is it fun. Everything I fenced dry, meaning for the listeners, meaning I didn't, when I competed, I never competed with all the electronics hooked up to me. I just competed with judges and just the weapon without the electronics. So probably foil is my biggest, the thing I experienced the most. But I
Gotcha.
never,
I'm going back to
with
I'm
that?
going back to Saber, which probably makes me clinically insane.
Yes.
But
And for those
what
of you,
have I done?
the listeners, the saber will whip. So literally, like if it hits you in the head or the shoulder or whatever, or even blocked, it'll whip and slap you in the body. And it's pretty much feels like somebody hit you with a whip. So it's just a brutal,
Great.
brutal weapon as opposed to being poked
Yeah.
by to a little bit. Sorry to interrupt, Elsa. I just wanted to make sure the listeners.
Oh no, it's fine.
Ahead.
Yeah, I'm going back to Saber, which everybody has some questions about. I've done foil. I have not done epee, but I've also done HEMA, which is historical European martial arts. And a lot of what I have learned is that you really don't need to see.
Oh, fascinating.
Because your job is to deal with the blade. Your job is not to necessarily deal with the precise nature of your opponent. And by the way, if you know where their blade is, 90% of the time you can find them.
Right. So you really use your tactile sensitivity through contact,
do.
your blade's contact with their blade.
Mhm.
Yeah, which
Well,
makes
almost
what's that?
I move really fast. I do not let people get much time.
I'd love to watch you fence.
Yeah.
Well, it almost goes back to how you're talking about using the cane on the ground to tell where the ice is and stuff. Almost like you're using the blade to kind of triangulate where the person is, what they're doing, etc. through feeling.
Yep.
Very analogous.
End up writing about fencing.
I mean, I have some projects in the works that may bring that into the fore.
We definitely need video of you.
So
fencing.
cool. It's so cool.
The listeners want to see it now.
Yes, for sure.
See your speed. Well, listen, we have to wrap things up here, but Dara, is there anything else that you're just dying to know that you want to ask before we officially close things out?
Well, I guess I'd ask this one question, and I would say my favorite essay of yours, Cataracts, Blindness, and Evocations of Horror on Tour. You talk about the whole writing trope where people are like, white eyes equals scary. You talk about how that is a problem. If you could talk about like why you think writers use this so persistently and how you think, they could be convinced to change, etc.
Well, I think it's easy. I mean, I think a lot of the tropes are really easy, is ultimately what it comes down to. It's the idea that it's very easy for us to sort of use visuals or to use sort of tropes to quickly get an audience on board with something we're trying to say.
Mhm.
But when we do that, we're actually using societal bias to sort of prop up our writing. And so what I encourage people to do is to think about what choices they're making. Like by using the cataracts in this character's eyes, am I just repeating the same thing that everybody else has done? And can I do this differently? How can I characterize them so that they become creepy without having to use cataracts? Because I will tell you, like the number of children who have run screaming from me on the subway because I have a cataracted eyes is not insignificant. And it's culturally embedded in the way that we talk about bodies.
Mm.
And I think we need to change how we other disabled bodies in our fiction, because I think that will sort of bleed through into changing the way that we look at disabled bodies in public.
It makes sense because, kids learn a lot from what they see. I can think of things I thought when I was little that was just because I saw it in a movie one time. And then I'm like, oh, that's not a real thing. Oh, yeah.
The age problem for parents, right?
Yeah.
Not real. So, well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been such an interesting discussion, and we really appreciate you being with us and being so willing to just talk and share. And Dara, what a fantastic job you did. Asking questions and finding it all. It was interesting. I found myself like most of the time, like I was a listener versus a participant on the podcast, because I was just interested in what you guys were talking about. So
for your job, Mark, better be careful.
That's, hey, she did a good job. Maybe she should. We'll let you jump in on another one. No, really, really fascinating. I mean, I feel like we could talk to you over and over again and more and more. And I think we probably just scratched the surface of what you're doing. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty prolific from a authorship standpoint, and that you work really closely with a lot of people. So I'm sure there's a lot there. Maybe there's a second podcast in our future. But we really do appreciate you being here. And
thank you so much, Elsa.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you.
You are so welcome. This is Mark Miller, thanking Elsa, Marissa, and Dara, and reminding you to keep it accessible.
This podcast has been brought to you by TPGI, the experts in digital accessibility. Stay tuned for more Real People, Real Stories podcasts coming soon.